If you're a founding team and you're stuck on titling,
Not good.
that's not good. That's not good.
Nope.
As you pointed out with investors, I mean, I think they're always looking for anti-patterns, right? They were really focused on, some things that they'd seen blow up startups. So this is clearly something is setting off alarm bells.
You have a deep bench. You have 4 founders. You can get a lot done with 4 founders.
Welcome to How I Met My Co-Founder, the podcast where entrepreneurs share raw stories behind how their founding teams met, built trust, and navigated conflict. I'm your host and team relationship expert, Annie Garofalo, and here's your all-access pass into the conversations that can make or break a founding team. Today, we'll be hearing from the Tonic.ai team, Ian, Karl, Andrew, and Adam, who came together in 2018. Their goal? To revolutionize how engineering teams create synthetic yet meaningful test data sets. Speaking of data, as many in the startup world know, it's incredibly rare to find founding teams with more than 3 co-founders. In fact, a recent analysis revealed that less than 7% of companies raising over $10 million had 4 or more co-founders. Tonic has absolutely smashed these odds. The team of 4 closed their Series B in 2021, bringing their total funding to over $47 million. They're backed by leading investors like Insight Partners, GGV Capital, and Bloomberg Beta. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind their success and see for ourselves if 4 co-founders is too many. Don't forget to check out takeaways and resources your team can use in the show notes, or sign up for our Substack and get them delivered directly to your inbox. Welcome, Andrew, Karl, Ian, and Adam. I really appreciate the 4 of you making the time and want to kick off with understanding how the 4 of you met and came together to start this venture.
We've actually known each other kind of a creepily long time. So Karl and I actually met in 8th grade, which we won't tell you exactly how long ago that was, but we're not fresh out of college, so it was a while ago. Andrew was Karl and my boss at Palantir, and then Adam and I worked together at Tableau. So many years of knowing each other in a variety of different contexts, including work and personal.
And Ian, are you the kind of the connector?
I guess, given how I just described that, I don't know.
Yeah,
Look at Andrew's face.
100%.
Yeah, you must be.
That's right. If you include me as a co-founder, which you should, then yeah, Ian is definitely the connector, because I would never have met Karl and Andrew otherwise.
So the 4 of you, so when you came together, you had varying levels of existing relationships. How did you go about building kind of the trust and commitment and knowledge of each other that's necessary to kind of take that leap and say, okay, let's build something, the 4 of us?
In my mind, there was really nothing challenging about sort of bringing everyone together, because Andrew, Karl, and I had already worked together, except that Adam and Andrew had never worked together, and they were both working in the same domain, which is the technical side of the business. So Karl and I work on the business side, Andrew and Adam work on the technical side. And I remember being a little nervous introducing them, thinking like, okay, well, like, how is this going to go? I had hopes that they would really get along and click, because, they're both really smart guys interested in, the same types of stuff. So it actually worked out quite well. I think the first meeting, went swimmingly, but
yeah,
that was the only even sort of like blip, I think.
So we this question, I think, is most directed at me, because these 3 had already worked together, and I'd worked with Ian, but I didn't really know Karl or Andrew at all. I don't know, to answer your specific question, I don't know how trust built up, other than to say it built up slowly, like over time. It's not like something that you gain overnight, or like you don't just immediately start respecting someone. It takes time, and you see them doing good work and working hard and doing their best, and then you start to respect them. My first intro to Andrew, though, not my first intro, but Ian and I had been chatting with Ian and Karl at the beginning of this, and then they start talking about this guy Andrew that they wanted to bring on as well. And I had worked with Karl for a second at this point. I trust his opinion. I already trusted Ian. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. You want to bring him on? And 3 days later, Andrew's on, and they're like, okay, Adam, Andrew's the CTO. And I'm like, what? Because we're both on the engineering side, and they didn't warn me of this. And I don't know if it was planned or anything. Not that it matters, but I was like, oh, that's interesting. And initially, I was pretty I was pretty annoyed with Ian for not having warned me that that's what was going to happen, because I was kind of shocked by it. It turned out to be a very good decision. I'm very glad Andrew is the CTO and not me, and he's doing a much better job than I would have done. So, Ian's wisdom was right. It was for the best, but it was still it was still mildly annoying at the time.
I never heard that side of that story.
Yeah, I remember where I was standing when Ian told me. Yeah, I was in my
Wow.
I was in my kitchen walking into my dining room, and Ian must have sensed there would be some awkwardness because there was some hesitation in his voice, but it was fine.
One of the big, I guess, potential landmines for startup teams is titling. And so that makes a lot of sense that it was something that came up early on, especially in a larger than average team. How did you think about making those decisions and titling and then communicating them? And is there anything you would do differently in retrospect?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think at the time, you're so worried about just sort of I wouldn't even say surviving, it's creating something from nothing.
Yeah.
We were 4 people with kind of nothing. We had a domain and an idea. What was driving it at that time was just, hey, how do we structure this in a way that we think plays the best to our strengths? And obviously you want to keep in mind the human element, but there's sort of you're so overwhelmed by the scope of what you're trying to do that I think, to Adam's point, I'm sure the message was probably not crafted the way we would think about doing something like that today.
No.
And, I think, as Adam said, it was, I think all of this shook out in 3 days. But that's the timescales you're working with at that
That's
point.
right.
Because, every 3 days is, a material amount of burn and also just, progress. So it's just sort of hey, we're just going to have to plow through here. And I think ultimately, what allows that to happen is trust, right? I think hopefully what Adam saw, and I think in fact we still hear yes, was that, we were doing it for the good of Tonic, not, for some sort of weird personal, thing that wasn't appropriate.
And I would say if you're a founding team, you're thinking about these things and you're stuck on titling.
Not good.
That's not good. That's not good.
Nope.
You need to be stuck on product. You need to be stuck on talking to people about your ideas and how you're going to change the world.
Yeah.
I don't think, honestly, the first 2 years or something like that, Karl's title was amorphous, completely amorphous. It was a joke. It was basically the butt of everyone's joke. It was is he the COO? Is he
Was it?
It was funny to me.
Yeah.
But it was legitimately, there was I'm not alone in this, right, guys? And it was there was a bit of an ambiguity over what Karl's title was. And we would just kind of, whatever meeting we were next having. Yeah, we're having a meeting with a customer externally. Make Karl whatever makes the most sense for that meeting in that moment. Introduce him as the COO, introduce him as the CRO, introduce him as, co-founder. It doesn't matter. The titles are just a way of communicating to the outside world at that point, because between us, it felt well, Adam, I'm the CTO and my code review says you should do it this way.
Right.
Not that Adam would have listened anyway.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't matter. For years, we didn't even have any reports. I remember when Ian told me, I'm we'll probably never have any reports anyways. What's it matter? Because it's so early.
That's how I felt about the programming.
Yeah.
That's how I felt about the programming language decision too.
Yeah.
It's we'll never
throw it out.
make it anyway. So
Yeah.
that's specific.
Yeah, I know. It's so everything.
What
so
Andrew's
difficult.
specifically referring to is that he went on vacation and he came back, and Andrew's had spent years building expertise in Java, and he came back and Adam had decided it was .NET.
Years.
Decade.
over a decade. Andrew was an expert
Still
in
chicken over
Java.
Still chicken.
I know at the time I knew very little C#. Very I had minimal experience with it, but I started writing code and I refused to budge. And you snooze, you lose when you're working at a startup and it's early on. So we ended up going with that. And I only regretted my decision. I've only regretted the decision once, and it's when we started supporting things in Spark, because it is so painful to not use Java. But other than that, I'm happy.
I love hearing about these differences in conversations that are coming out now. And it also sounds like you have a shared, almost humor looking back on these, what I'm sure were hard conversations at the time. How do you navigate those points of difference? They happened at the beginning. I'm sure they're still happening. That's what makes a team effective and get to a better point. What do you think are really important principles that you have as a team in navigating differences or disagreements?
I'm going to start just on the tech side, just real quick. Honestly, I think Adam and I fundamentally both value delivering product to customers as number one. And we have differences in approach for sure. But at the end of the day, all we care about is delivering product for customer. So we're aligned on that value. And the disagreements that we have are like, well, should we do it this way or that way or the other way? But like at the end of the day, Adam delivers value to customers or I deliver value to customers. And we see that in each other. And it's like,
right.
Who cares how it got there?
Yeah. The implementation details, not important.
I think that's definitely true, but Andrew actually glossed over something which I think is really interesting. That is a dynamic that we see a lot. I think they do an incredible job kind of pairing and leveraging each other's strengths when it's appropriate to, get the outcome. And I think that's something that the team generally is pretty good at, about being intellectually honest about our strengths and not stepping on each other's toes when there's something, where someone else is just going to do a better job. I think, just keep your ego out of it as much as possible and, realize like, yeah, we could all have a big ego on titles, but there's a much, much bigger problem. Like you could be, CTO or COO or CRO of nothing if we don't solve these much bigger problems. And I think keeping that in mind, does help mitigate some of the ego conflicts that can, as you said, really stall the important parts of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. That principle of it's not me versus you, it's us versus the problem or us versus like on any obstacle facing our business.
And I think we see a little that, and we try to have that trickle down to sort of our team. There are obviously, like, as you grow a team, you have to give titles out. But I think across the board, we see people, we have people who are, running our finance team who are also doing marketing. We have people who are, leading some of our sales expansion internationally who are doing analyst relations. Like we have a lot of people wearing multiple hats, not just at our level, but throughout the entire org.
Yeah. And it seems like there's this theme of using titles as a way to communicate externally and having some flexibility in that external communication, but at the end of the day, being aligned internally that we're all going to do whatever it takes to solve this problem or further the company. And I'm curious, as one large external, maybe sometimes internal stakeholder, I'm thinking about investors, and you've raised a number of very successful rounds. So one question I have is, as you were going about fundraising, how did you think about mitigating any potential investor concerns, whether it be about having 4 co-founders, which is larger than average, or building a remote first team? How did you navigate those external relations?
I have one quick story, probably a good question for you to carry on, but one quick story. When we early on, we got to the final round of a prominent accelerator, and we ended up not getting into that accelerator. We were disappointed about that. But one of the primary reasons, this is in 2018, we were just starting a company. One of the primary reasons they cited for us not getting into that was because we were distributed. They said, Adam's in Atlanta, the rest of the team's in San Francisco. This is not going to work. Lo and behold, 2 years later, that accelerator went 100% remote. Everybody was remote. It was seen as more of a badge of honor to be distributed remote first team. So I think, we were there multiple years, 2 years early, setting up the framework to be a pretty good.
I mean, as you pointed out with investors, I think they're always looking for anti-patterns, right? We got hit on this a few times of like, what are the titles? And, to us, it was always kind of funny. It's like, we're not focused on title right now. Or they would, how are you guys handling distributed? And we're like, that's not what we're focused on. Like, we're focused on like these things. Like, can we talk about like customers and the problem? And, but it was, a pretty strong theme of most of our early conversations about like, how are you handling it? How do you guys make decisions? And I think what maybe wasn't apparent and, it would be hard for an investor to detect was that we had built a high degree of trust at that point. And some of that was because of how long some of our relationships were. Karl and I know each other literally decades. And, I'd known Andrew, like more than a decade, and Adam for like 5 or 6 years at this point. So it was sort of, I think they were really focused on, some things that they'd seen blow up startups. So, we were sort of like, this isn't really, but it was really hard to communicate in some of those conversations. Like, this isn't a thing. Like, we should move on. Like, there's much harder things to talk about than this. But it was just something that I think eventually we just sort of said, okay, like we got to just get really clear and crisp about how we talk about this, because this is clearly something that, is setting off alarm bells, even though we all internally don't see it as really concerning at all. And, I think we basically just sort of said, hey, this is how we do it. I think we got a little bit firmer about how we talk about titles, maybe in a way that like probably wasn't truly authentic to how we were operating internally. And then also just described, hey, this is how we sync with Adam. We do these. And, I think we just sort of had to make it really clear that there was structure on this and it was working, and that we should really be spending time talking about, these other things.
I'm curious, and we kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of how you have humor. And even in our conversation, I can see that humor and levity is such a value and a like connector between the four of you. How do you infuse that kind of culture across your team and across your company? And how does that help you navigate maybe some of the more difficult times?
Yeah. I mean, I do think on the engineering side, we have like a culture document, and it does outline a variety of things. Most of them are not about humor, but there is one bullet in there that's like, you may as well enjoy working with your colleagues, and trying to bring levity and that kind of thing is important. But I think it more comes from culture at a company. I think comes from the top. Like it really legitimately does come from the top, because you can work with the exact same people in two different companies, and depending on what's at the top, you get like a different feel for it. And also who you hire impacts things as well. Try to stick to like, people talk about the no asshole rule. But it's just like the idea of like hiring people, no matter how brilliant you are, if you're a pain in the butt, then this might not be the right place for you, kind of a thing.
It can be hard sometimes, especially with engineers. Like, you get some brilliant engineer that just culturally is going to be a challenge, and saying no, especially when, hiring can
it's
be
not
difficult.
just engineers.
Yeah. No, but that's what I mostly interact with.
I think one of the piggyback on what Andrew was saying is like, I don't think we deliberately set out to create a certain culture. I think it just sort of came from our interactions and fortuitously. I think, we all, personally, I wanted to start a company because, I wanted to work with friends and I wanted to do work that was interesting. And I think, those founding principles, starting a company is very hard. And, having some sort of levity and some sort of, easygoing approach to it makes it a lot easier. And helps you get through it. We definitely take ourselves, seriously. Like we have a lot, going on, a lot right on our shoulders. We're trying to really create something that's lasting and has a big impact. But you might as well have fun along the way to make it more interesting.
That's right. Can't take yourself too seriously.
That's right.
Yeah. If you take yourself too seriously, it's going to be even harder than it already is. And I agree that there's sort of no way, to codify that in like company principles, like be funny. I think, you can say like, we don't, sort of make it clear that we don't all, we all make mistakes. It's okay to laugh about them sometimes. Obviously we also have to be serious when, there's a real mistake that we have to fix. I think it's mostly just been organic. And I was trying to think like, is there even something we could do to kind of infuse that? And like, we can write about it. But it's not like we're going to interview people and say, you must do like a 5-minute stand-up routine as like your final round. In front of the whole company or something, something like that. And like, oh, that wasn't very good.
We did have somebody do a stand up at the last company offsite.
We did.
True, we did.
That was pretty good.
He was.
Yeah.
He was
not too far off.
Our marketing team's done a really good job of incorporating that a little bit in our branding too, with like the Pig Data Company, and some of our other swag.
Yeah. I definitely will say, when I was scrolling through your website, I had myself some giggles. So I really enjoyed it. Karl, you mentioned that one of the reasons you wanted to start this company was to start a company with friends. And it's clear how many benefits there are, even in this conversation, on having that existing relationship, building trust, being able to almost be questioned in a way that doesn't feel threatening. You can have these harder conversations because there's so much there. I'm curious, have there been challenges being friends and having those personal relationships while building out these professional relationships?
We get along 100% all the time.
That's good.
Perfect smooth sailing.
End of interview.
No, I think like I had lunch with another founder of a company a week ago, and he was commenting, and he ended up having a founder breakup and left that company, and he was commenting like, that was a blind date they were set up on, and I was reflecting on like, I don't think I could have done this on a blind founder date. Like there's absolutely no way I would have been able to make it through this experience. I don't want to speak for my co-founders, but I think there's like, you're gonna, in a sense, there's a little bit of family here. Like, you are very close. You're working on very hard problems. You're very close to the people. You spend a lot of your day with them. you're going to bump into each other on certain issues. Having deep mutual respect for one another and a history means that, you can trust this person, despite maybe some immediate disagreements, but long-term, you're all going in the same direction and trying to achieve the same things.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, and I think, going back to what I said about sort of the investors and looking at the anti-parties, I think our level of history is somewhat unusual. And, I think it's 90% a benefit, to what Karl was saying. I think the 10% where it's more challenging is that I think we can be less varnished with each other. I think we can also, sometimes, confront each other in a way that's more like brothers or something than the way you might confront a colleague. And I think in those moments, it's, it is more challenging, but, because it is like brothers, we also can have like a big, stupid disagreement, which is sort of that 10% case. And then, realize, okay, that was really dumb and just move on. Whereas, I think with someone that you have a little bit less history with, you have a disagreement, it can be, fester a little bit more, become more catastrophic. We can just sort of say, okay, that was dumb, but there wasn't like a fundamental breach of trust. It was just us being, stubborn or something like that.
Yeah. It means that there's more arguments, but also it's quicker to repair. I think there's a lot of, those pros and cons, and it's a give and take. Would you be willing to walk me and the listeners through one of those shared decisions? So I think about co-founding relationships as almost a Venn diagram. And so I'm imagining 4 circles, and there's overlap in different areas and how you work together. And then there's this area in the center that are shared decisions that you want everyone to weigh in on and everyone to have an opinion on. And I'm curious what those are for you and how you navigate reaching a decision in that specific kind of overlapping area.
One thing I just want to touch on reaching a decision quickly. This isn't an anecdote, but it's like a general principle that I think comes back to something I said earlier, which is about like Adam and I share this value of like getting product to customers. That's something I think that's really important as a founding team to agree on, not just between Adam and me, but between all of us, of like, what are the values that we're going to lean back on when we disagree over something? What are the values that we have as a company or as a founding team that can guide us? One thing I talk about when I talk about like decision making in an organization is make sure you understand who the winner of your whatever argument you're making, who is the winner. And I don't mean who's winning the argument. I mean, if you decide to do X, who's going to be the main beneficiary of it? Or if you decide to do Y, who's going to be the main beneficiary of it? So for example, you might decide to build a certain feature and that would help this segment versus this other feature you could build, which would have this other segment. Another kind of winner, though, might not be which segment. It might be like engineering gets ahead because engineering gets that headcount, or marketing gets ahead because marketing gets that headcount. The worst kind of winner, though, is it's your ego. My ego is the winner because I'm stubborn on this object and I want it to be my way. That's like a winner that we'll always try to like call out. It's like, are you sure that you're not arguing this from a perspective of just wanting to win for yourself and not for whatever the other winner might be? Anyway, that's a framework that I've employed during decision difficulties.
Yep. I think another thing is we do try to stay in our lane.
Yeah.
So
That's
generally, Karl and I won't get too fired up about an engineering specific issue. Like I'm not going to go spend a ton of time trying to convince Adam or Andrew that some architecture is correct. One, I'm probably wrong and it's probably a dumb idea. And two, even if I might be right, it's probably just like not a great use of time because they probably thought about it and, they're really, let's stay focused. And I think there are some things where it is, like I'm trying to think of like things that are like the most, like the hardest to disambiguate, and they're the most cross-functional. I mean, things like a cloud strategy, where there's an engineering component and there's a clear, but very serious go-to-market implication. Those are the types of things where it does require, not just us, but like, our whole leadership team and whole company really, to kind of think these things through and to work through the problem and do the analysis. One thing we try to do is try to have conversations with data as much as possible. So, I think that's something that we have learned over time. I think when we were smaller, it was harder to have conversations with data because doing an analysis meant we do the analysis and that defer the whole conversation until one of us has gone and done the analysis. I think as we've gotten bigger, we can kind of parallelize things more, have analysis done, and then, have the meeting. And I think that generally helps. And generally, because, I think our intuition is usually pretty good, but there are moments where, what % of our healthcare customers are currently using our cloud? we can remember, I that, but can actually get like an actual answer on that and not have big error bars or a de facto question. I think that can really limit the types of debate. And then, again, kind of staying in our lane a little bit, if Andrew says, hey, supporting HIPAA on cloud is going to be, a year of engineering work, it's probably not as useful for me to say, well, no, like, why isn't that 2 months? Like, I can think of this path that's like 2 months long. I think that does limit the sort of scope and the, number of like points that you have to kind of work through to get to a decision.
Yeah, I think that's great. And for me, that all comes down to shared information, whether it's shared hard data that you have or share information that you trust coming from one of your co-founders that you like agree, okay, we're taking that perspective as fact and we're using that to get to figure out the problem scope and then come to a solution together with this shared data set and really grounding in that.
One outlining questions ahead of time that are going to be sort of the points of debate.
Yeah. Absolutely. Conversations aren't just the conversations themselves. There's also a preparation phase and dedicating the appropriate time to preparation. And similarly to the follow through. Once a decision is made, it's not just done. There's still continued follow up and understanding of, is this the right decision? Let's really like hone in on this. And so I always think about a conversation as 3 parts: the pre, the during, and then the post.
Yeah.
I know we're reaching the end of our time, so I want to conclude with one final question. For a team with 4 co-founders, maybe with varying levels of knowing each other, working together historically, what would one piece of advice be that you would give them?
I'll go first so you guys don't take mine. So I have the easiest job. Assume good intent with people's actions. I'm going to give a second to make their job harder. That Venn diagram you were talking about earlier, where like the middle of the Venn diagram is where everyone has to get together. Yes. You want to minimize that intersection. You want to make it as small as possible, in my opinion.
I would say operate with a long-term mindset. So just remember, whatever challenge you're facing today is, as Karl sort of said, like, it's not the biggest problem. It's not the problem you're ultimately going to have to solve. So just remember that you still have to stay focused on the long term. And, I think that helps a lot with sort of some of the things we're talking about with like titling and other stuff like that. That's probably not your longest term problem. Biggest long term.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm going to go next.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, be really curious about what other folks are doing, but also be open. Like the reverse of that is let people in when they ask you questions. Just have really low ego and just be like curious and open to whatever feedback they have about your ideas, because you're not going to have the best ideas on your own. And, always remember, like when even though Ian said, people stay in their lanes, every so often Ian still has an opinion about this technical architecture, and like, you got to stay open to those things because they're coming from an outside perspective that can be really valuable.
Yeah. Okay, you guys made it hard for me. Now I got to come up with something new. I think part of it is with 4 co-founders, there's a lot of different, as reflects a lot of different strengths and weaknesses and things that people are good at. But we didn't have to build out our team as early as a lot of other companies. If you just have 2 co-founders, you have to bring on more engineers early. You have to bring on marketing. You have to bring on sales early. But because we had so many different founders, we could flex into new areas easily. And so I think part of it is learn quickly and explore new areas and be willing to, go be the head of marketing for a few months and then we hand that off to somebody else and go be the head of sales or go do data analytics for a few weeks. And, being able to be really flexible and adapt and move into different areas and wear different titles so that you can get a lot done with 4 and you don't actually have to. You're not raising money and spending capital when it's precious on bringing in outsiders to do the work that you can figure out to do yourself. You have a deep bench. You have 4 founders. You can get a lot done with 4 founders.
Wow. Even just like that past minute and a half of you all sharing your pieces of advice, it's so clear how you work together in such like an effective way. It was a delight to hear about the Tonic.ai team and can't wait to follow the rest of your journey.
Thank you.
Right, thanks so much. I think we learned some stories about each other too.
Yeah, that's right. We did.
That was the Tonic.ai team. Stay tuned for a quick word from them to learn more about their company or visit them at Tonic.ai. Thanks for listening to the show this week. Please make sure to click the follow button on your podcast app so you never miss an episode of the show. We'll be concluding this season with an Ask Annie Anything. Submit questions at Confidante, confidante.info/podcast or email podcast@confidante.info. I'm Annie Garofalo, and thank you for listening to How I Met My Co-Founder.
The Tonic platform gets engineering teams rapid access to data when they need it, where they need it. From generating realistic test data that mimics what you have in production, to subsetting datasets down from petabytes to gigabytes, to spinning up ephemeral databases, our suite of products hydrates your environments with the quality data you need. We work with structured data, semi-structured data like NoSQL, and even free text like PDF or Word docs. Deploy Tonic self-hosted or on our cloud. Whether you're building software or building LLMs on free text, head over to Tonic.ai to learn more about getting quality data for your developers today.